Cool. Wallace, you ready to get this party started?
Let's get this party started.
All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome to the very special 12th episode of Warped Wednesday. I'm Mike Pestilence. I'm here with our co-host, Wallace O'Donnell. Wallace, my friend, how are you doing today?
That's me.
It is you.
Oh
Crazy enough.
man, I'm having a day. And by a day I mean a good day. And you know
Oh,
why I'm
I'm
having
super
a
happy to hear
good
that.
day?
Wallace, why are you having a good day?
I'm having a good day because it's another day in ninth edition with our new Chaos Demon Codex here. And I will tell you, Mike, I reread the book
Oh,
today
yeah?
from the rule section back. Just like I wanted to see if there was anything that could permeate into my mind. And I found a couple of cool things, and I also found some things that I thought were cool, and I'm like, oh
That's
wait,
awesome.
the rules say that doesn't work.
Yeah,
Um, but
that, that
you
makes
know,
sense. I
I
found actually one of the best, like the best pro tip I can give to any player looking to level up their game. You're thinking, hey, I'm pretty good at 40k, but I want to get to the next level. The best tip I can give you is actually just sitting down and reading your codex. Like it's totally busted if you actually just read the book and like look for things. Like it's really powerful. Highly recommend it. It's an elite tactic. Not every player can pull this off, but if you can actually pull off the strategy of just actually reading your codex, you're gonna get massive benefits out of that.
the amount of times I've heard good players say things like, oh, I forgot I could do this, or I didn't know it did that
Yeah,
when going over a data sheet is like incredible. Like, and it's for me too. Like I was reading through the book today and I just totally had
yeah.
forgotten that Nurglings just like auto and on sixes. And they just do that, you know?
It's
That's
one of
just
the
the thing they
many.
do. Now, is that important? Probably not, but it'll come up, putting a random damage on stuff. And that's what I mean is like you sometimes just got to go back through
Yeah,
your codex and remind yourself with fresh eyes what you're about. So
exactly. Well, it's one of those things, right? How often does a game come down to like one unit survived on one wound, or something like that? Like there's so many little things. So just knowing your rules really well and just looking for like fresh combinations. So I think one of the issues is it's very easy to get stuck in a point where like you've got like one game plan or one game style in mind. Just cracking up your codex, looking again through the list of relics, being like, oh, that actually seems really powerful. I want to go ahead and add that to my list. You know, stuff like that. Well, so you want to go ahead and tell everyone today's topics?
today's topic is uh what is today's topic?
Today's topic is we're going to tell all of our beautiful chaotic friends how to guard against the new Imperial Guard book. Because I'll tell you what,
Oh yeah.
ignore everyone complaining in the guard communities, ignore everyone on Reddit saying, "Oh, the book's totally fine." This book is wild. People that have been playing a lot of games on TTS are just very concerned about the impact it's going to have on the wider meta once all the units are released. It's a little bit out of balance with a lot of other books right now. And I think if you don't come prepared with an army tailored to beat guard, I think you're going to be in a very tough spot if you run against a good guard player in a tournament.
So, I think it's one of those things, new book always good these days. And that's kind of
Yeah,
always been the case. The new book is always supposed to be good. It helps people chase like purchases.
40k, you'd be like
But
that.
right, and 40K is a little bit like that. But I do think this one is manageably good. The sum of the things that they do that are good or a little
Yeah,
bit broken in comparison to everybody else is not so insurmountable as it was with like the Tyranid book
yeah,
release or the Votan book release.
yeah. Agreed
They do
completely.
super, super strong things, but you know about them because you're a little gamer. And once
And
you
you're
know about
listening
those
to the
things,
Warhammer boys talk about how to beat guards, so you're going to come in fully prepared.
yes. And once you know about those things, you can tailor your lists, if you so choose, to beat them. And that's what I like. I like that
Absolutely,
there's counterplay.
absolutely, and that's what we're going to talk about later. But whilst I'm feeling in a gaming mood, I'd like to play a game with you. Would you like to play a game, my friend?
I would love to play a game.
Well, everyone, before we keep going, let's go ahead and play this week's episode of Whose Relic Is It Anyway? And Wallace, I know you and I love talking about Demon's book. Let's mix it up today. I want to take it to the next level. I want to see if you're really a pro gamer.
Okay.
I'm going to go out of the Chaos Space Marines Codex here for Relic. Now, I'm not going to go Legion specific. That's too hard. One of the generic Chaos Space Marine relics. And I've got faith you can figure it out.
Ooh,
Remind any new
okay.
viewers what whose relic is it anyway is all about?
Well, it's our weekly trivia game. And how it works is Mike is going to select a relic from the book, and I have to guess which relic it is based solely off of its flavor text. So that's the little paragraph that describes the lore, purpose, or function of the relic. And if I guess it correctly, I get a yacht.
Paid for by me,
Paid
Wallace.
for entirely by Mike.
It may be a little paper mache yacht. You can only float a little leak on Fremont, but you will get a yacht. Okay.
You can't
So
blame me
today's
for
relics.
trying.
Yeah. Today's relics, I've got a spicy one. So first thing that kind of stands out to me is the flavor text on the Caspian Spring Codex. Like there's like paragraphs, like just massive paragraphs above some of these relics. Like they really want you to know what all these are about. Like I'm looking at particular, and again, it's not what I'm going to pick. Like the Mantle of Traders, they go double digits on the lines for that one. They really want you to know what this mantle is all about.
I hate that you referenced Mantle of Traders because that was what I was going to generically guess if I didn't know the answer.
It's one of the few relics you know.
Yeah.
Let's see here. Oh, this is a fun one. And it's actually a relic people run. That's a hint. It's like a relic people run, sometimes ironically, but people do run it. Okay, this relic, quote, from the dawn of the Horus heresy until now, this accursed bolt pistol has murdered countless heroes of the Imperium, its wielders mere conduits for its malignity. The weapon's hatred is bloated with the malice of the warp, and its fury is fanned by 10,000 years of treachery and betrayal. Wallace, what relic was that? Ignore my squeaky chair. What relic was that, Wallace? And I will say, literally, I realized halfway through the name was in the description.
Oh, it was?
Yes.
I probably should have listened.
Let me give it to you one more time.
You told me it was like a bolt pistol, and my brain racked, and I couldn't come up with a single relic I knew that was a bolt pistol.
Well, hold up. The weapons, let me give you again the money quote, the money shot here, Wallace. The weapon's hatred is bloated with the malice of the warp.
Malice.
Close, very close. I'll give it to you anyway.
No.
The weapon's name is the Warp's Malice.
Oh, I wouldn't have guessed
Mortal
that.
Wound Slanesh gun.
Oh, okay. You see, the thing is, I've never taken that relic, and I kind of forgot it even exists. So as soon as you said bolt pistol, I was like, wait, I don't know that one.
Yeah. It's one of those things I think people would run a lot more if it weren't in Nephilim, because it's actually pretty good for CP, especially in Slanesh. You can kind of auto 6 to make it do some guaranteed mortal wounds.
Mm-hmm.
It's cute. It does stuff. Also, a chance for redemption for the Warp Hammer team overall. Go ahead and give me my relic guess, and if I can get this one, then at least one of us.
Oh man, one thing I've realized about the Demons Codex recently is a lot of the relics will just say the name like right in the relic.
It's really tough. Yeah.
So I guess I got a good one here. I'm gonna just get a little bit of a little light for myself here.
Sure. Well, so you're right.
It's too easy.
It's too easy.
Too easy.
Sounds like a challenge I can handle.
So I'm gonna make it harder. So the blinding.
Hold up! No. What do you mean make it harder? Are you not going to give me some of the flavor text?
No, I'm going to give you another one because the one I picked initially was like it just kind of just
okay.
It was like this gem is a really Slaneshi gem. The blinding speed with which this blade flicks out makes it appear as if it does not even occupy the space between thrust and strike. What am I?
It's tough because it's clearly a Slanesh weapon of some sort.
Mm-hmm.
The only Slanesh weapon anyone cares about is Soul Stealer. And I know it's not the Slothful Claws, which is the other weapon I know. I think there's like a third weapon that gives you like extra attacks or something. I'm gonna guess, just knowing how GW names Slanesh stuff. Is it the Quicksilver Sword?
Oh, buddy, it's the Silver Strike. So you're pretty close.
The Silver Strike. I get that one. Come on, give me points for that one.
I will give you 0 points, as I myself have also failed.
Oh, he's disappeared in the warp for a second. But I just want to say how unfair it
Well,
is. It's just I want everyone watching to know. My relic was called the Warp's Malice. Wallace repeated the word malice after I told him that was in the name, and I gave it to him. Meanwhile, I half guessed the name, and he says I get 0 points. This is true injustice. This
you
is
gave it to me. You gave it to me, but I didn't want it. So I'm gonna go ahead and shove it back.
well, sometimes pity is all we have left when we do such a bad guess.
At you. Because
Well,
this Slanesh relic is like better stats, but all it really does is if your target lives an attack, which it probably wouldn't, it gets
sometimes
-1 to hit until the end of the battle. I don't know.
I don't know. It's like what I feel like Slanesh is like a billion variations of like -1 to hit in combat.
Yeah,
There's just like
yeah, I know that's the thing.
yeah.
They're like, we couldn't come up with anything more than -1 to hit. I would like them to get the old Locus of Trickery from Zeech. That would have been hilarious. Roll two
That would be really
dice.
cool. Or even the old stratagem, like the aura of -1 attack. That would be really cool to stack
Mm-hmm.
that -1 attack with -1 to hit. But anyway, let's not mourn what's no longer here. Let's celebrate the future. Wallace, do you want to move on to our main topic now, or is there anything else you want to talk about?
No, not really. This is long occupied my mental bandwidth, which is the guard problem.
Okay, the guard problem. That would be actually a good name for this episode, the guard problem.
Mhm.
Um, well, okay, so let's talk about it. Every time a new codex comes out, the meta shakes up. Um, I think people are really sleeping on guard. Oh, for the record, actually, I think people are really sleeping on Votan. I think they're
Yeah.
easily like a top five army. I don't know if I put them top three, but easily a top five army. Um, and Votan coming out really shifted the meta towards more shooting again. Feel like we're a bit of like a melee psychic meta. We're back to shooting. And then this new guard codex. I mean, wow. Walls, talk to me your first impressions of the guard codex.
My initial thoughts on the Codex was that it killed my Bloodthirster with 2 heavy weapon squads in 1 round of shooting,
Oh
which
man.
is not a good start.
Yeah.
So they have a lot of ways to get rerolls. They have a banner.
So let's talk about the spanner actually, because that's one of the most outrageous things to me in this new codex. Is a lot of codexes will have a relic that can ignore like damage caps or something, some ways to ignore modifiers, like some sort of aura. All three of those together off one unit? What the hell is going on? I'm kind of flabbergasted to see ignoring hit modifiers and ignoring phase caps in an aura on shooting units. I'm, listen, I'm struggling to understand some of these decisions that were made in the codex. How some of these things made a difference.
We'll calm down a little bit. Calm down because
I
there are
refuse to
things
be
that
calm. The
guard.
fury of Khorne is firing up in me. Man, I just want to go
There
beat
are a
some
few things in guard that
guard
just
armies.
don't. Guard are actually less good at shooting than they used to be. However, all of those counterplay mechanics we had to deal with guard are things that they now have answers to.
Oh
That's the
yeah,
big deal. So previously, guard just lost to Abaddon. Abaddon would walk into the guard lines and he would pick up their entire army and they would do 3 damage to him a turn, but it would be too late. Like that was the previous experience with that matchup. The Bloodthirster in a similar position would take just his 8 wounds a turn, and then he would get up the field and he would just wreck
yeah.
people's lines.
Potentially start healing. Potentially.
Potentially, if you have Blood Drinker Talisman. And they
Yeah,
didn't have a way to counter that.
totally
Similarly,
fair.
guard were very weak to units just getting up the field and wrapping them, like
Just giving them
just
giving them little hugs.
giving
Guards
them
don't like
hugs.
hugs. They were terrified of hugs.
You'd get like one
Even
Banshee
touches.
squad, you'd
Yeah,
get one troop squad, you'd get one Demonette squad into their lines, you'd wrap one of their units, they can't hit you back in combat for any real damage, and then you would just touch all their stuff. They wouldn't get to shoot at the things they want to shoot, and then all of a sudden all your melee units are in their face, they lose the game.
yeah.
So those were all things that they just lost to, which isn't really fair. Like Tau, for instance, are a gunline army that make up for the fact that they only really shoot with the fact that they have a lot of units that can fly. They have command abilities that allow them to fall back and shoot. They
Their
have ways to
mobility
get
is
out of combat.
fantastic. Yeah, yeah.
But
Um,
But again, so guard were a shooting army without any of the tools to counter your or to counter your ability to outplay
Yeah.
them. And that's not where a faction should be. So I do agree with the concept of a lot
Oh,
of
for
these
sure.
changes.
I will say,
So the banner, very pushed. That is
yes.
very pushed, in my opinion. So I don't even really necessarily need to get into the egregious stuff. There's really just a few things you need to know when you're playing against them.
Yeah.
So all those things I said about them shooting less good kind of go out the window against Karskin units.
Those Karskin, I've played a couple of games against guard, and those are always those boys are definitely nightmare fuel.
You give them rerolls to hit. You can make them auto wound on sixes and count as wounds of sixes because that rule is still in the game for some reason.
Yeah.
And you can even get that up to fives. Then they have a rule where every time they like get their six to hit, which can become a five to hit, I believe, it does a mortal wound up to a maximum of 6 per unit,
Yeah.
but it's not capped at the number of units. So one thing they can do is they can send a Karskin squad out and they can shoot 3 different units. They can split fire and they'll do 6 mortal wounds plus the regular damage. So the first time I played a game against them, they killed my Bloodthirster, then the Karskin went in, and then they killed all of my Demonettes, a squad of Flamers, and a Fate Skimmer that I didn't realize they would be able to teleport to sea. So I kind of walked into it blind and got blown out of the water by that one unit. So that's an important thing to know that they do is they can make their Karskin teleport as well. They have a once per game teleport.
Yeah, once per game for one unit. So it will be a bit telegraphed when it happens. It's not like if they bring 3 Karskin squads, they can all teleport, which is a really important distinction to make. You don't have to worry about the teleport once. And they can still add mobility through things like they can make a squad like mechanized infantry, so it can move out of transport after it moves. So we'll have a good range there. But they can only do the teleport once. And the combination is CP intensive. And Walls, correct me, I think it's 2 CP for the 5 ups auto wound. And then it's a CP for the spicy 6s to wound. So it does cost them 3 CPs. They can't like spam it every turn.
They're going to do it once, and it's going to cost them secondary points if they don't drop them near their lines because they're going to lose their inflexible command bonus or whatever it is for having all their
that
units
secondary is so
range.
good. That secondary is so good. They don't really need to like max it every turn. It'll still be a very good score, even past every turn. I will say that.
Yeah. So my more or less my point is, I don't need to focus on what's egregious. I'm just going to tell you what you need to do to beat them. First,
absolutely. I love that attitude.
You need to screen. You need to screen your lines. Even if they start everything on the table, you need to make sure that they can't just deep strike into your lines. And a lot of good guard players will wait until you present the opportunity for them to fit a Karskin squad somewhere that can get a lot of targets. They're not going to use it right away. They have no need to use it right away. They're going to try to put the pressure on you by using things like Leman Russ, which are very tanky for their points cost, to start forcing action on the table. And then once they've tithed away a few of your units, they're going to look for those gaps in your lines. So just make sure at the end of each of your turns against a guard player, you're measuring, or each of your movement phases, you're measuring things out. You're not letting them have those holes that they can fit those models in. So that's the first thing you need to do.
Just to add on to that, because that's a great point. I think Auspex scans are pretty good because those Karskins, ultimately it's just 10 T3 bodies. They do not want to get shot before they can shoot. The whole point is the base of the Karskins are a built-in alpha strike that can operate on any turn. So if you can set up a situation where I think Thousand Suns can do this very well, but the only place they can drop is a spot where you can shoot them with some AP2 bolters first or AP2 flamers first, like Thousand Suns have in spades. That's basically neutralizes the threat instantly.
The second thing I'm going to say that you need to do against them, so like you got to screen them. You also got to be aware that they have a command that gives them a 12-inch bubble of no deep strike.
Yes.
However, it's really important to know that commands are an actual resource for guard now. They don't have very many, and using them up really sucks for them. So what you want to do is if you have a deep strike intensive army, you want to try to start more stuff on the table than you normally would. So like with demons, for instance, I'm starting most of my flamers on the table against them because they're still a fast unit when I deploy them regularly. Or I've started a unit of bloodletters on the board and use things like frenetic bloodlust to help my bloodletters get up the table quicker. However, I'm still putting a few units in Deep Strike because then they have to use that command, which means they are less effective as an army. Whenever they do that, they're losing things like rerolls on their units or shoot in action, that kind of stuff. So you want to make sure that you're tithing them for their orders, but you don't want to overcommit to Deep Strike reserves because you have to understand they can screen out 12 inches. If you have something with range longer than 12 inches, so that's not super hurt by that screening capacity, maybe a Terminator brick that you wanted to drop in for whatever reason, you can still do that. But you just need to be aware that they're better at screening than most armies because of that command. And it's a command that chains off of the commander, so it can effectively like hit their whole army.
Yes. So I will say, actually, adding on to that, that's just a great general point. Where often people will get caught up on like X army has Y counter to my stuff. And they often lose sight of the fact that ultimately that counter does cost resources, or maybe there's a trade-off. There's almost always a trade-off being made in CP usage, different other buffs they're not bringing, a trade-off they made in list building where they didn't build a certain tech choice in the list. So ultimately, when an army has a counter, it's never quite as cut and dried as, oh, they just have like a free like benefit against me. So I think it's a really great point where, again, demons, they still have pretty good mobility on the board. And if they're doing that, it's also telegraphed because they do it in their command phase. So at least you're going to know going into your turn. It's not like you're going to set up a Deep Strike turn and then they're going to pop it on you. It will be telegraphed. And another really important thing to note is that say you Deep Strike unit of Flamers against Guard, and they're going to keep popping the 12-inch bubbles on you. Okay, that's fine. Turn 2, you can still put them down somewhere, over 12 inches away behind a wall, and then they come and shoot the following turn with the 12-inch. Deep Strike's not dead against Guard. It's handicapped. There's trade-offs to make, but I don't think it's necessarily like a super hard counter to demons unless you let it be. Which, of course, we'll also talking more about how to not let that be a super hard counter.
Right. So at this point, we know that we have to screen them. We know that they can screen us pretty effectively. That's 2 steps to understanding the movement portion of the game. They're relatively mobile, and knowing that their tanks can shoot out of combat with their top turret is important to know. Now let's talk about the next thing that you need to do. The next thing you need to do goes into your list building. You need to have some kind of reliable anti-armor. This is no longer a meta where you're dealing with a bunch of like really flimsy Eldar models that are hiding behind a wall. Yeah. This is a meta where big units like Leman Russes and Land Fortresses and Votann Sagittar are going to be able to drive at you, and if you cannot punish them for doing that, you are going to lose the game. Do not overcommit to cheap, non-damaging units. You need to have some damage in your list, and every faction has access to that, either through the faction itself or through something like a Dreadblade, Chaos Knight inclusion.
For sure.
No matter what you're playing, you need to have dedicated anti-armor, at least enough to stop them from just putting the Leman Russes in your face.
Exactly. And that's part of the game where ultimately, yes, a problem exacerbated by Guard. That's not a Guard-specific problem. Like, if you lose to a bunch of Leman Russes just because you literally, like, just walking towards you and you can't stat check them at all, then there's other armies that are also prevent issues for you. That's just one more. And again, exactly like Wallace said, every army has some sort of ability to kill big things. Crack open your codex again. Maybe there's a relic, maybe there's a unit, maybe there's a warlord trait, maybe there's some sort of combination you cook up that you've been sidelining a little bit in favor of getting a little bit too cute. Which, trust me, I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I definitely can write lists that are like too cute myself, that are vulnerable to getting stat checked. So yeah, definitely you don't want to roll up to face like 6 or 7 Leman Russes and be like, oh, I can't pop multiple a turn, because then you're going to run into some real issues. Because part of it too is that they're so cheap, they almost don't need to be screened. They're like a fast 150-point unit that's really tough that can tie up your stuff as well as you can tie up it. So you need to be able to just not avoid getting tagged by a bunch of Russes, which is really counterintuitive. I've seen Guard players starting to do that with a new cost to mobility in their army. So you want to be aware of that.
Yeah, you need to have some way to deal with them just stat checking you in your list. And I think that's important for the meta as it is right now, because it is becoming a lot more of a vehicle or heavy armor meta. With things like Tyranids going for heavier units like Trigons. Or what are those guys? The big gun shooty guys. You know what I'm talking about. They got like the
Tyrannifex, I think they
that
are. The 17 wound
Tyrannifex,
one.
yeah.
They
I've
have
played
some.
into a ton of double
Oh yeah,
Tyrannifex lists recently. So
yeah,
like you have to be prepared because a lot of things are just going bigger in order to either be able to meet that stat check or in order to do that to their opponents,
yeah.
especially if you're in a very shooting terrain setup. So a very shooting friendly terrain setup. So that's one thing you have to do in list building. And I think if you're not doing that, you're probably not going to win a lot of tournament games. Now, at home
Yeah.
games, you can do whatever. The next thing that you need to have against guard is you need to have something that hedges against the no line of sight shooting that they have. It's
For
not
sure.
crazy powerful, but it is enough to pick up, say, a 10 sister demonette squad without seeing it.
Well, and
And
one thing
if you're
I'll jump in quickly, Walls, just add on. We're
yeah.
operating under the assumption that the data slight's going away because that's been multiple whispers are kind of
Mhm.
leaning that direction. Um, so we're assuming that, for example, indirect will suffer the -1 ballistic skill. But one important thing to note is that they have very good access to +1 to hit. So realistically, their mortars, if they want, are going to be hitting on 4s, unless you have your own modifiers to hit. So yeah, just to clarify what the assumptions we're working with are.
Yeah, and they can actually give a lot of buffs to like their mortar squads, just their regular heavy weapons
Yeah.
team mortar squads.
Extra
To
strength, extra to hit, extra AP. They have a lot of rerolls. They have a lot of buffs they can apply to those.
now again, like I said, it's not so crazy like it used to be where you're gonna lose like half your army without them being able to see you.
Yeah.
Really, like I think the math for the 3 mortar squads with somebody giving them orders is it takes out like 10 demonettes, which is not nothing, but
Oh,
you need to have a few things that hedge your bets against that. So what I mean is you need to not just leave a character out in the open or in a position where they can easily kill the thing screening them with a
yeah.
mortar squad and then get shot by the other two. I made that mistake into them. I was screening one of my trance weavers with a unit of 4 Nurglings. They shot at the Nurglings, killed 2 of them with one of the mortar squads. And then
Mhm.
they fired the other
Yeah.
2 at the trance weaver and killed my trance weaver. So you have to be careful. You have to hedge your bets. And this is something that you can do in list building and in game, just knowing that you're going to have a few, heavier objective units. Don't
Yeah.
rely on like one chaos spawn anymore to hold your
Well,
backfield objective.
so Wolf, I actually want to jump in because I've thought a lot about countering guard indirect, which realistically, exactly as you said, it's basically just 9 mortars. They're never really not going to bring mortars if they're in an effective list, but also the heavy artillery like manticores and basilisks. It's frankly pretty not what guard players want to see. So you don't think you have to worry too much about those. So you have to just honestly simply crack out some math hammer, see what units of 3 mortars shooting 3 times does to you, and just make sure you have units that can handle that with a reasonable likelihood of surviving. I think the fact that they suffer the -1 ballistic skill from losing the indirect exception makes negative to hit pretty good.
Mm.
But even Nurglings, if you go ahead and pop the 3 Warp Storm Descending Shadow for initial -1 to hit, so they're -2 to hit, they have -1 ballistic skill, they have +1 to hit, then they have -2 to hit. Their mortars will hit your Nurglings on 6s as long as you have 3 Warp Storm points and can spend those. So I think -1 to hit's pretty good against their artillery. But I also think I'm actually looking at Chaos Spawn, exactly what you're talking about. Simply for that little roll, it seemed like a joke roll basically, where the heal to full unless a unit kills it in 1 activation. A unit of 3 mortars. Remember, you can be in cover and you get +1 to save. So your little Chaos Spawn can save on 3s against their mortars. They're hitting you on 4s or 5s, wounding you on 4s or whatever. It's actually really tough for mortars to kill a spawn, which will always keep healing back up to full. So 2 solo spawn. I've messed around with the math. They're actually super effective against guard mortars.
Yeah, just don't leave it up to like one cheap, like cute unit to give you an 12 or an 8 on a turn.
Sure. I think you'd have two
And that's
spawn is
super
the sweet
important.
spot where it's a 2 spawn is actually super tough for the mortars to kill because you're almost
Mm.
certainly just going to keep healing back up and take 0 damage. And you do have that second backup just in case they randomly spike through a 1. Um, so yeah, I think exactly what you're saying. Weak stuff is vulnerable to mortars. I think armies like Eldar actually are going to suffer a lot more than demons. They
Oh
can't
yeah.
really get the -1 to hit as easily on indirect. Units like Swooping Hawks, I think, are definitely going to suffer a little bit when 9 mortars are running around everywhere.
So let's take a step back. So we've talked about some of the things you need to know about them in order to beat them. And let me really quick, let's do just a rapid fire for the chaos factions, things you think would help against
Well, actually, I
the
do want to note one more thing.
mm,
And this is might be coming up in your next section, but I do want to touch on it because it's super important. Um, Combat trapping remains very, very good into guard. I apologize if you're going to work this into your next section. I just want to make sure this talk is like an overarching principle of ways
yeah.
to beat armies like guard. Combat trapping, and this can be either from good old-fashioned tri-pointing, on which you basically get through models to make a little triangle around one of their models to prevent them moving out, or units and abilities that either prevent units from falling back from you, or at least provide like a roll off to fall back. Um, I'll talk more about this in army specific sections, but I think Chaos,
Yes.
compared to most armies, has a lot of ways to prevent fallback. And even though, again, the tanks can shoot into other combats, they can't shoot into their own combat, and they have very limited ability to shoot into other combats, um, or fall back and shoot to get angles on other combats. So I think if you have ways to work on combat trapping, and this is what I'm talking about, go ahead, pop open your codex. There's going to be units,
Yep.
there's going to be abilities that you've probably forgotten about, have not used in a while, that can help make combat trapping more reliable or give you ways to trap in combat besides try pointing.
And on that note, so like let me just start off with like just as a rapid fire for each faction,
Yeah, let's go rapid fire. Absolutely.
just some things that you might consider into guard that I think
Yeah.
are good. Like one thing is like I've been thinking about this recently. When's the last time I saw a Death Guard player actually bring Plague Burst crawlers? And the thing is, Plague Burst crawlers are not terrible into guard. They provide you with a way to clap back at some of their really like cheap, weak units that they're hiding that do a lot of damage, like those mortars
Yeah,
and
mortars
the
do not want to be shot
Karskin.
with clay burst mortars. Yeah. Oh, Karsk,
Yep,
exactly. I think,
Karskin as well.
yeah, because I
You
think one of the
put a
things,
couple in there.
yeah, I think that one of the things we've talked about is a smart guard player does not want to pop their Karskin turn one. They want to wait for a good opportunity. Turn two, turn three, turn four, especially when the screens are whittled down and they get a really juicy teleport opportunity. I'm just like a good Necron player using Veil of Darkness. We'll rarely use a turn one. We'll wait for a really good opportunity. But if you can apply that pressure on every turn, even if it's only a few Karskin, I don't care if you kill three Karskin a turn out of line of sight, you're putting them on the clock of every turn you wait to get better positioning, you're suffering a massive damage decrease, which makes the
And
calculation in their mind very difficult to play around.
it is. And so that makes them being able to sit back less appealing. So
Yeah,
having something like, again, Plague Burst Crawlers are good. They have good anti armor. -1 damage is actually quite significant into guard because their most popular units right now are like, damage to heavy bolters or
a lot of
they have
two,
the
two and
plasma
three damage.
cannons.
Yeah,
Yeah, they have the plasma cannons that are damage 3. Against a Plague Burst Crawler, it takes quite a few Leman Russes to actually put
yeah,
one of them down, even if they can see it. So, just right off the bat, that's one good unit that sticks out to me from your book that you might consider bringing at least a few of. Um, Moving right along, and we're going to go into Chaos Space Marines. So, Mike, this is where I think your breadth of experience might be helpful here. What do you think are some good units to consider if I'm a Chaos Space Marine player wanting to deal with this new
yeah,
guard?
yeah. I think Space Marines definitely have an interesting matchup into guard in the sense we have a
Mhm.
lot more tech than people realize. I think a unit that's really underrated is Warp Talons. I know they don't have the raw stat sheet like wow factor of possessed, which is they're always compared to because they're the same points cost. Um, but I think warp talons are really looking very appealing as the meta now, in the sense of as we talked about, guard hate things that can trap them in combat. That roll off is really good, especially with a big unit that can tag multiple guard squads. Maybe one squad is unreliable. If you tag multiple squads, it's really spicy. And one thing to keep in mind is that try pointing with a unit, a fast melee unit like Warp Talons is very good because in Nephilim, they have to spend the 2 CP to try to fall back before you make the roll off. Excuse me, if you try pointed, they spend the 2 CP for the desperate breakout to get out of combat. That the wording of that is before your roll off from Warp Talons. So they can spend 2 CP, which is very hard to come by these days, and then still fail half the time. I mean, it's backbreaking if you can use a Warp Talons to come in. I think Alpha Legion actually have gone
Yep.
way out in value with guard being good again now. Because the Legion trait, of course, -1 to hit is fantastic to cancel out all their +1 to hit or make them hit on fives when they're not getting +1 to hit. I think the pregame move of a big unit warp challenge is to go in there and just kill a bunch of guardsmen, then also tag multiple guard squads or mortar squads is very potent. Um,
I
Yeah,
think Zeech marks are also not terrible, especially if you had like some Zeech
absolutely.
mark Terminators or Bikers.
Well,
They
I will
can't.
say I don't like it on the Terminators, where it's a unit they're ready to put like multiple. I like it into units like maybe a 5-man Havoc squad, where they really only want to put one tank into, where suddenly that taking out the first damage is really impactful. I don't think it's as good on Terminators. We're really going to put like 5 or 6 tanks into them, so just taking one attack from one tank doesn't matter as much.
It's not
Does that
for
make sense?
that though. It's for the
Oh yeah,
strat to
the
Auspex skin.
Auspex scan. There we go.
Yes,
Exactly what we talked about earlier.
you put
Yeah,
even just a 5 mana Terminators or like a 5 man of Bikers
yeah,
shooting at some Karskin can do a lot of damage. So it's just
absolutely.
another thing to think about is if you have access to Auspex skin, can you fit it in your list? If so, I think it actually helps improve your game plan a bit.
Yeah.
Um,
And I do also think that the prayer illusory supplication, just because guard, they can easily hit on threes with other tanks if they want to. And they really want the rerolls from Lord Solar. So just being able to take off both of those effects together makes your Terminator brick much more important. And I think if you're running like an army like Word Bearers, for example, that has ways to add reliability to that prayer, I think now's the time to make sure you have the double fully invest in the upgraded apostle if you're running Word Bearers. Just make sure that illusory supplication goes off on a key turn.
And if you're like Iron Warriors or Black Legion or one of the factions
Yeah.
that really buffs up their Terminator squads, you will win the stack check. You will win the stat check against the guard player.
Yeah. Oh yeah,
Because
I'm working super hard at Iron Warrior Terminators right now. Because again, all of that 2 and 3 damage hates going into 3 wound bodies with -1 damage, plus the feel no pain. That combination is super potent into the kind of dice that guard are going to throw at you.
Yep. And like we said, if you're really, really hurting for some anti-tank at ranged, you can always dip your foot into grabbing some Dread Blades. And it's not a terrible idea with Chaos Space Marines, but you
No.
just got to make it work for your list.
Well, and one
Um,
last thing I want to point out before we move on from Chaos Space Marines is an FLG events, which is a lot of the ITC events in the United States. Um, the Dread Blades are free if your Warlord's detachment is the same god as the god of the mark you give your Dreadblades, or the favor you give your Dreadblades. And why that's really important for Chaos Space Marines is often they're taking Abaddon and Supreme Command. Well, Abaddon and Supreme Command, his detachment has all of the god keywords, and you can bring any favor you want on a Dreadblade for 0 CP, have it 0 CP to Dreadblades. That also adds because CSM have really no indirect ability. And having 3 Havoc launchers, honestly, again, we're talking about I don't care about the math. I don't care if it only kills like 3 Karskins with 3 Dreadblades. 3 dead Karskins a turn really affects how the game is played.
yeah.
Yeah.
So up next, I actually wanted to talk about Chaos Knights on the note of those Dreadblades.
Okay.
So
Yeah,
the
well,
Chaos Knight faction.
I was going to say, Walsh has been doing a ton of playtesting with the Chaos Knights and the Guard lately. So yeah, I'm actually really excited, just as all of you are Warhammer fans, to hear what Wallace has to say about this matchup. Wallace, talk to me about
I
Knights,
love Chaos
Knights
Knights.
versus Guard. Oh, they're such a great army.
Chaos Knights are a warm bowl of porridge on a rainy day. They are my comfort food. And let me tell you, there's few
Oh man.
factions that are more enjoyable to play for me than Chaos Knights because I've spent so many years
Yeah.
playing Horde armies that literally just cannot check my opponents on any of their math. They have to like just be sneaky and tricky. Chaos Knights, you sit down and you're like, oh man, I can just outroll you. And you
know,
can
right?
absolutely just outroll the guard players or even the Votann players with your shooting phase if you're playing something like Vectrix as an example, and you're spamming out a bunch of brigands and you're spamming out a bunch of executioners and you have some carnivores to just run up and be threats. And now that Chaos Knights have access to demon allies without losing anything, it is phenomenal because you can take little units like Nurglings and now all of a sudden you don't have to pay an exorbitant price to screen your expensive models. The Karskin cannot come into good range to shoot at the important stuff if you have little things like Nurglings or Demonettes that are running up the field and just screening for your bigger knights. So in that matchup, you can outshoot them if you're bringing enough anti-vehicle, which if you're playing Chaos Knights, you have an entire codex worth of anti-vehicle.
Absolutely.
And you can use demons as your screens to prevent the Karskin combo. If you prevent the Karskin combo, you will win in the dice box like check. And their mortar teams that are oh so scary have to shoot at like Nurglings to make them screen less good. You know, like they can't shoot your
Yeah.
vehicles with them really. It does almost no damage. And then you're shooting them back if they're hiding with havoc launchers all game. And
Yeah.
with my experience on the secondaries, you actually have a very reasonable secondary game plan into them. It's not like they can just hide there. And if they do try to just hide there, you get to set it up so that you have one big go turn. You shove all your knights in their face and you will win. You will just win the game when you do that.
Yeah. And
So,
so I want to talk about that because one of the things you talked about briefly that I think is super important is the critical mass of havoc launchers that Chaos Knights can bring versus Guard. Because one of the big issues is Chaos Knights, a unit of like the Rough Riders, for example, countercharging is a big issue. Counterchargers do not want to take 2 turns of 9d6 indirect before the melee threat gets to their lines. I mean, it's brutal. Um, I think, again, the issue is one of the things that Walson talked about at the start was against Guard, you absolutely cannot show up as an army that can take like 6 Luminosas to the face and you just can't kill them.
yeah.
Chaos Knights, I mean, I don't know how it's been in your games. I've messed around with some math. You can easily pick up 3 or 4 Russes a turn in Vectrix. Not easily, but like it's definitely possible. 2 or 3, it feels very reliable, the amount of shooting you can bring. Um, well, I know there's like so many different War Dogs, so many different Big Knights. Are there any specific units that you've really enjoyed First Guard with your Chaos Knights?
Um,
Like
yes.
combos?
So yeah, I mean, you have a 2 CP ability to choose one unit, and then your
Yeah,
army gets exploding sixes against that unit.
yeah,
That's a really good use of your CP. You have 1 CP strat for rerolls on one of your units of one. When targeting something on an objective, that's also really good. I've been running a lot of Knight Desecrators recently, and
hmm
then because the meta's been getting so deadly that Blessings of the Dark Master just doesn't do it anymore. Like you don't have time to get it online before he dies. I've been taking Wartborn Stalker on my Knight Desecrator because with that's the blessing, the dark favor that allows your knight to deep strike onto the battlefield. So I've been deep striking my Knight Destructor in or
Desecrator. Yeah,
Desecrator, yep,
yeah,
my Knight Desecrator every game against these gunline armies and started him on the table against things that can't really hurt him. And against these gunline armies, he deep strikes in, and then he gives this aura of rerolling hits of 1 to your little war dogs. So I'll deep strike him in aggressively. He'll threaten a 9-inch charge, maybe an 8 if you gave him the trait for the
yeah,
+1 charge. And then I'll push all my brigands up so that they're near him. And then all of a sudden, my brigands are getting rerolls of 1 and making them a lot more consistent. If you're playing something like Cabentus or Vectrix, or even Herpatrax, like these houses that are very good at just getting in your opponent's face, that rerolling ones makes the consistency on your go turn a lot higher for the
yeah,
rest of your war dogs. And then because you're bringing a Knight Desecrator and you're not having to spend the points on Abaddon anymore as your obligatory like warlord choice, you can take things like Helm of Hounds, giving you reroll the wounds of 1.
yeah,
That is so good. And that math means that you will just win the dice check against, again, them or Votann or any of these other factions that like their big heavy
oh yeah,
models that they put out in the open.
yeah.
It's so good that I was going to play Chaos Knights at LVO if it wasn't for how much I like Be'lakor.
No, I know we're huge fans of Disciples of Be'lakor. It's an army that captures both of our hearts. But man, Chaos Knights, they keep tempting me
They
every
do.
time. Like, so here's one of the things. People that don't know me, I work as a data analyst. And there's periods of the day where I'm super busy, but other times I take a little break. I'll just be, we've all been there. Let's, flip through on our phones, whatever. Pop up Waha PDL, read through Chaos Knights. I'm like, why am I not playing this army? There's so much cool stuff. Um, I'm almost finding some new combination where, well, so you talked about the Knight Desecrator with the Daimonis, the relic for the massively high
Yeah.
damage, which is with Vextrix to get a hit and wound reroll, it's so mind-bogglingly reliable. Or the
Yeah, and
opposite.
that's me singing the praises of Chaos Knights a lot, but I will say they're very good into guard.
Yeah,
So
but they're
that's a
they're
good
good into a lot
faction.
of armies these days. Um, it's tough because Vextrix, it is a little annoying losing your wound reroll as
Yeah.
Vextrix versus Votann, but I think it's still one of the better Chaos options versus Votann. It's Chaos Knights. Just because the issue is a good Votann player, what they're going to do is they're not going to just unga bunga at you turn 1. They're going to like use their mobility and high range to like get angles, like plunk you away from a distance, and then go in for like a kill turn. Well, if you give you a bike that wants to like play an angle, like pregame move, like they'll snipe you, you can use mobility and long range to just pick up that biker unit super easily back. Um, I think they're a really potent combo or counter to Votan. Um, let's talk more about whether we're actually fully sold on Disciples versus Chaos Knights because I love that tech choice. I will say the big knight on the board, as you said, is a little bit in a rough spot for Scard, even with that Blessed Dark Master. But again, Warpborn Stalker is really good. And Warpborn Stalker is Pantheon Undivided keyword, which means you do have access to the stratagem to stand back up on a 4-up, which again is very potent versus armies like Guard that can only really, realistically, they're only going to kill you in one phase. Because if you have your Desecrator on objective, they really only have one phase to kill it, and half the time you get back up anyway, you're still counting as 10 miles on objective. Um, yeah. I also think, I know a house you and I are both very big fans of is House Corvax. Do you think that's an option to go versus Guard? Or because the ability to move units, either two War Dogs or a big boy, through terrain is very potent versus Guard? Or do you just think the damage output of Extrix or the durability of Herpetrax is more important versus Guard? What do you think?
I don't like Corvex as my whole list per se.
Yeah.
And so if I'm bringing that house, I would prefer to bring that house as part of Disciples, and that's part of
Yeah.
why I leaned into Disciples initially. Is I like spooky ghost knights that go through walls.
Oh, it's so cracked. It's one of those things until you've played it, you can't fully understand the impact. Well, hold up, Well, so I think we've gotten a bit ahead of ourselves. Are we done with Chaos Knights? Are we ready to move on to Demons?
I'm ready to move on. Yes, because
Let's go ahead. Let's venture even further into the warp. Let's talk about what Chaos Demons can do versus Guard. You want to go ahead and get started?
So Chaos Demons are good. They it's ironic because you'd think that they would be very weak because of that 12-inch no deep strike aura being a deep strike faction. But the fact of the matter is I've now played several games, and what I'm finding is as long as I can hide my pieces reliably, I have ways to stall the game out long enough that they either feel really hurt by the fact that they're wasting that, or not wasting it, but they're having to utilize that command every turn, that they aren't able to really handle your deep strikes. So that's nice. And so I've been taking Bloodletter units and at least leaving one of them in reserves, just as like a threat. You know, if you have a melee unit in reserve, it's a threat.
Yeah.
And like you already said, you can deep strike them into safety. Like, so if you're forced to drop them on turn 3, just put them behind a wall. And then they'll come out next turn, whatever. Their opponent lost more by having to do that every turn to screen out that one unit.
Yeah.
So you have to have fast units, and there's a lot of really good fast units in the Codex. Obviously, Flamers are going to be the standout unit at the moment. That may change, but even if Flamers change, you still have stuff like Burning Chariots, which can go very quickly and do quite a bit of damage.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. You also have a lot of fast melee units, which Guard doesn't necessarily enjoy too much. So even something like Seekers can be pretty effective into the Guard matchup, just because you charge them up, they charge into a bunch of regular guardsmen, and then you string them out.
Yeah.
Yes, well, you string them out to move block your opponent, and they have very large bases. So these are all things that are good.
One thing, Wallace, you have not mentioned is good, is all of the big monsters. So let's go ahead and put it, plainly for everyone to see. I'm of the opinion that the meta has rapidly shifted, much more rapidly than people are aware of with the recent Votan and Guard releases. I don't think the big monster lists, I think they're super fun. I think you can definitely go like above average at a tournament with them. I think if you're trying to win a big event, I think the Monster Mash lists have quickly fallen off as competitive options. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think Monster Mash is done. I think one big monster is still viable because you can deep strike one big monster.
Sure.
But BT plus Lord of Change plus Be'lakor is no longer the way, because Tau, Votan, Guard, they all have a way to just make one of them be dead a turn, and that's not where you necessarily want to be as the Monster Mash player. You want it to take longer than that. So yeah. I think big boys are off the menu at the moment, unfortunately.
Again, I don't want anyone running Monster Mash to feel bad. I think it's still a very viable list. It's just not at the highest level. If you're like, I'm trying to go to a big event and win it, I don't think that's a list you can really bring and feel confident about. I think if your goal is to finish above 500, absolutely. You can easily go above 500 with a Monster Mash list. If you're trying to finish top 10 at a major event, I would not all be shocked to see Monster Mash, depending on matchups. But I think Guard and Votan specifically just kind of dumpstered those specific lists so hard. I think Guard players have to look deeper into the codex. Before
It
those
feels like a
ultras,
coin flip. You're just kind of hoping that you don't draw that matchup,
yeah,
and
and
over
you're
the
also
course of
hoping
a
you roll
long
four
event.
ups. You're hoping you roll four ups on the key turn. You got one go turn where you send the big boys in, and you just really, really, really need to roll four ups on that turn. And
Yeah.
some games you don't, and it do be like that sometimes.
So on that note, I've been experimenting with lists that hide more frequently. Disciples of Be'lakor, you can deep strike Be'lakor. That's great.
Yeah,
You can also start them far enough back on the table that even if they push all their tanks in line to shoot him, as long as the Karskin can't shoot him, the plasma cannons actually do very little damage because he
yeah.
drops them down to damage 2, and they're only
So
hitting on 4s, and they're only
and we
wounding on
talked about earlier,
5s.
where compounding -1 is actually very good versus guard. Be'lakor is the best greater demon, I think, versus guard, because he has that innate
Yeah.
-1. He can pop Descending Shadow for initial -1. And he has -1 to wound and -1 damage. Because the guard, a
Mhm.
lot of the tanks they're bringing these days. Let me say it like this: the tanks are either long range or they're high damage. They're not both. Demolishers you can outrange, you can deploy them back and then teleport them in. And the guns, like the Balakans and the plasma, that has a little bit more reach, harder to hide from. It's a lot of medium damage. That -1 damage is very strong against. If you pop Descending Shadow, their turret weapons are ballistic skill 4 with +1 to hit. You're -2 to hit. They're back to hitting on 5s, okay? No rerolls. It's very unreliable. You feel very good about that. The Karskins, of course, they're a level of busted that gets through Bellacor's defenses, but at the same time, you've got Nurglings to forward deploy. You've got
Yeah.
other units to screen. If they teleport their Karskins in turn 1 and just do a lot of damage to Be'lakor, I think that's a little bit of player error. I think as you get some more experience, maybe the first time it happens, don't feel bad at all. It's a complicated game. But once you get a few reps in, I think you'll find with positioning, the Karskins versus Be'lakor isn't as big a worry in practice as it seems in theory.
And what you can do with him essentially is you start him really far back.
Yeah,
Then if and this is on long deployments, you can't do this on like Dawn of War short edges.
sure. Yeah,
But on long deployments, you can start them back. They have to drive up and put things in potential charge range or out in the open so that you can shoot back at him.
yeah,
In order to shoot at him, and then he can use the warp portal to teleport forward. And then if it's turn 2, you can drop in all your flamers around him or whatever off his
yeah,
warp locus. Not terrible at all. You can also just put him in deep strike and not even worry about it, which is another option. But
sure.
one greater demon seems still fine because you can put that demon in reserve. Something like
Yeah.
Shalaxi jumping out of a warp
Infernal
locus
Rapturous.
off of
Yeah.
your Enrapturus.
Yeah,
Yes,
she plays a little
still
hard,
legitimate.
summons Shalaxian. That's still a
Yeah,
lot of fun.
Shalaxi will wreck a Leman Russ too.
Yeah.
So Shalaxi coming in, that's a big
Yeah.
threat. Great unclean one with a Fluvor or virulent touch in a bile sword. These are all things that are, as a one of, totally fine.
We're going to disagree on the Great Unclean one, simply because if they do the 12-inch, deep strike thing, he does not have the mobility to get himself back in the game. Like Flamers or Shalaxi can deep strike somewhere safe, and then the following turn's movement phase get back in the game. A Great Unclean one does not have the mobility to get back in the game. But overall, I think overall principle is super strong. I couldn't agree more. So yeah, I think also Lord of Change is still very good. Where guard players, they're not bringing the pools of infinite cheap infantry that they used to bring. Infantry are more expensive, and there's a lot harder to fit a lot of them in the list these days. So mortal wounds have gone up. They're still an amazing verse guard compared to other armies like Votan or something, but they're still valuable. And I think Lord of Change, especially with all the anti-shooting defenses he can bring, can actually stay on the board a little bit.
And this is maybe too complicated an idea to share in like this forum without physically showing you what I mean. But Leman Russes, a lot of the times they have to share the same shooting angles. So they usually will hold hands all next to each other in order to, and this is my experience playing against them. They'll have to all line up at one line in order for them all to get line of sight on something. And so usually you'll see that there's not just one tank by itself. It's usually either 4 tanks all in one line or 3 or even 6. I was playing a game where there's only 2 shooting lines, so they were just driving them around bumper to bumper around the table like they were some big super unit. Hit that with an Infernal Gateway, please. That is
there we
fun.
go. Infernal Gateway, super spicy, especially after Lord of Change.
Yeah, smack a Leman Russ with
Yeah,
that, or smack one of their screening guard units and have it hit their whole
yeah,
line. That's what that spell is for.
exactly. And just a reminder, again, we've talked about this in different forums. We'll also talk about this in videos, talk about this in articles. But Infernal Gateway, remember the trick to get max value is always use line of sight blocking terrain to block off the closer units so you can see the units further in. That 18-inch range is just it's so powerful with Infernal Gateway these days. Um, and again, they're often positioning like guardsmen in front. They're kind of clumping up behind these guys who give them no deep strike bubbles. Drop a little Infernal Gateway in there, especially the guardsmen strung out in front. The counter to demons is like string some guardsmen out in front. Pop an Infernal Gateway out there, just hit them with mortal wounds. Um, they don't have great healing capacities. Like it's not like Votann where they're going to heal flat 4 every turn. So just
Yeah.
putting the on really will make a big difference later in the game.
So demons are hard to execute army without the big guys. So be prepared for some failure initially. It's a lot of practice to start getting that to work for you. But I've been finding things like demon princes to be very effective because of their speed and their melee
and the abilities like cheese lookouts is really powerful.
And they're just a hard enough target that even if the mortars take out their screen, they can eat a good number of shots before they go down. So demon princes, very solid into guard, really lists that just want to hide. And then they have things like burning chariots or flamers, or bloodletters that can come out and do some damage. Strats that give you mobility are your friend. Frenetic Bloodlust is your friend. Otherworldly Tread is your friend, etc.
And I think the stratagem to pile and consolidate extra 3 inches pile and consolidate on a demonette squad or a seeker squad, super powerful versus guard in terms of getting screens off. And the last thing I would say is it's very, very niche. But stratagems, I'm really just thinking about one stratagem here. The Disciples of Bellicor stratagem move through units is extremely powerful versus guard in terms of getting those wraps off we talked about earlier.
And last but not least, Thousand Sons, and piggybacking off of that idea, you know what? Army of Renown happens to have a strat that gives you move through units on your warp
Is it the goat Army of Renown?
It's the goat Army of Renown, baby. Let's go. There's a real faction right there. But no, seriously, Thousand Sons are in a great spot in the meta. Guard have no way to deny your psychics. You're just going to send out small trade units at them all game, and those small trade units are going to use Warp Sight Plea so that you can draw line of sight using the unit you just teleported in front of them with your Exalted Sorcerer, and then you're going to cast a bunch of Mortal Wound spells through this like cheap 105-point rubric squad, and that 105-point rubric squad is going to kill more than 105 points. And guard players don't have too many tools to like dig the 1,000 Suns player out of their corner of the map, which is what you have to do to beat 1,000 Suns. So I actually think 1,000 Suns are fine. They don't really need to change much of what they do.
Well, especially because a lot of the guard profiles, I think Rubric Marines are very strong versus guard, because their profiles are either 1 damage, which does absolutely nothing to Rubric Marines, or it's like 3 damage plus, in which case you're okay being shot at Rubric Marines with invulns like plasma guns. You're okay with that. The last thing I'll say, I haven't played 1,000 Suns versus guard. This will sound weird, but don't be afraid to charge rubrics into guardsman squads. Like often, for example, 1,000 Suns players are used to like doing plays where they go for warp time plays on rubrics just to like get more bodies onto an objective. Don't roll that advance. Go ahead and warp time charge the guard squad on the objective. Even a 10-man, you'll kill some of them with your melee. And this is what we're talking about. Just go back, read through Codex. Like I found like random, just like rubrics versus guardsman melee has been actually weirdly important in the games I've played with 1,000 Suns versus guard. Don't be afraid to like look for any chip damage you can. And the last thing I'll say is that even matchups that seem tough, like I think we kind of went through Death Guard very quickly just because they have the least tech versus guard. You're still really going to feel the impact of, as Wallace talked about at the start, their top end damage is just not the same place it used to be outside of the Karskins. You're really going to be thankful. Worst comes to worst, at least they don't have the Relic of Lost Cadia anymore in its old form. Because that was, Death Guard really hated walking into that. The top end damage is in there, which means you always have more of a chance to just outplay your guard opponent.
Yeah.
So, even if it seems like a tough matchup, you can always still win the game. Roll some dice, focus on your fundamentals, focus on the stuff we talked about here in this video, and you've always got a hell of a fighting chance.